Hello, and welcome to the Amongst Romance podcast, your window to everything Italy from an outsider's perspective. Join us each week as we navigate the Italian way of life and all the adventures that come along with it. You know what I was thinking about after we did the last episode about Chieti was that there are two types of tourists that come to Italy, right? There are those that want to see the major sites. And I understand that because if you're coming to Italy for the first time and you don't know when you're going to come back, you definitely want to see the main things, right? But I think there's another type of person who comes to Italy, and it could be your first time, it could be your 10th. Those are the kind of people who want to see sort of those hidden gems, right? Things that maybe other people don't really know about. So I thought we could do an episode that we share our tips for finding those hidden gems in Italy and how people can go about that.
What do you think qualifies as a hidden gem?
That's a good question because I think hidden gem has become a bit overused lately, right? I think a lot of people keep putting things like, oh, this is a hidden gem, or this is off the beaten path, or, undiscovered. There are many ways of looking at it. I would say for most people, I think a hidden gem is either a destination, be a city, a town, or region, or even like some kind of natural landscape that flies under the radar of mainstream tourism. And I would say mainly people from outside of that location, right? So for Italy, it would be something that most people don't know about if they're not Italian, right? Because I think Italians, especially people who live in that area, obviously that's not new to them. And I think those hidden gems won't be the ones you find in your guidebook and something that, tells everybody to go to.
Yeah, and also there's a couple other things that it needs to qualify as a hidden gem, right? It's got to have its unique charm. It has to have the cultural components, natural beauty and such, right? And then there's the authentic experience. You want to feel that genuine feel for the area. It needs to be authentic to that region.
So having said that, it's kind of hard to look at a place like Italy and say, well, hidden gems, because I feel like Italy is such a touristy destination. But at the same time, I think there are so many places that a lot of people, and I'm talking people who are not Italian, people from, let's say, Canada, like we come from, they might not never heard of. Do you think Italy has hidden gems still that to be discovered, or do you think everything's been sort of tapped out?
I think for foreigners, people outside of the country, North America, for example, there are a lot of hidden gems. The usual places that everyone visits, of course, is always going to be Rome, Tuscany, sometimes Sicily. But between the north and the south, you'll find so many undiscovered locations. Mostly, locals know about them. And I find that you need to really talk to people wherever you go and just get an idea as to where they would visit most often, right? And what they think is an undiscovered location that you should visit.
I think because Italy has so many little towns and villages, it might seem like they are undiscovered because in a way, even like in our area, we have so many towns that we've gone to, right? Like Rocca San Felice, Gesualdo, which are very pretty towns. They have the medieval castle. They have the views of the mountains. They are just stunning. And I bet you most people, like even listen to this podcast, they probably have never heard of it. So when you look at it from that perspective, whatever makes it as a go-to destination in Italy can be anything really, because it's whatever's been discovered by the latest blogger or the last person who went there made this place famous that others have known about. So I thought we can do a post today about maybe give people some tips on, if you want to look for sort of off the beaten path experiences in Italy, how do you go about it? How do you find those hidden gems?
I think the best way to visit and see these hidden gems in Italy is to rent a vehicle. The transit system in the big cities are great. They also have, the Frecciarossa, the high-speed trains that go from region to region. But if you want to discover these smaller places, you'd have to get a car. That's highly recommended. And of course, you need to prep beforehand because You can't just show up and just rent a car with your, local license or your state license. You have to get yourself a international license, and usually you can get that from CAA or AAA, depending where you live. But easy to get, and it doesn't cost a whole lot. I think it was maybe $70-$80. You get a couple of your passport type photos done and get that prepped. And most likely when you do rent a car online, what they will ask for is for that international license when you do pick it up. I think you would benefit quite a bit from renting a vehicle.
I think one of my favorite ways to see Italy is by doing road trips. I think every time we've come to Italy before we moved there, we've had the car almost every time, didn't we? And I think that allowed us to see so many different places that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to, right? So I agree. If you want to see or get to those sort of off the beaten path places that might not be on the bus route or the train route, or there's definitely no airport. So your best way is to get to those places with a car. Renting a car is probably your best way of being able to discover those small places, whether by accident or by actually looking them up. And having driven in Italy for many times, doing road trips, I think that's my favorite way of seeing the country.
Yeah, 100%. The experience of driving is actually pretty awesome. A lot of the mountainous regions that you would visit or drive through, they're very scenic. So I think it's something you have to experience.
The best part about driving in Italy is that whenever you're on a highway, they have a lot of these little areas where you can pull over, whether it's like a rest stop or just like an SOS type space where you can just park. And sometimes they are located along the road where there's like scenic spots. So you can actually pull over and stop and just take a picture of where you are, because some of those drives are really breathtaking. I love discovering places like that. And you also have to keep in mind that when you're driving, I guess this would be another tip, is that Italy is quite large as a country, right? I mean, for us, like from Canada, you can drive for, I don't know, like 10, 12 hours and still be in the same province. But in Italy, you can drive, let's say, from where we are to, let's say, Florence would be about 7 hours, right? And you can see so many different things. But I think to get the most out of your experience would be to explore the region by region, right? So as opposed to driving from, let's say, Venice to Florence to Rome, which is also doable, but I think you'd be benefiting more if you, let's say, flew into Rome and checked out Lazio, right? There's so many different little towns and places outside of Rome that are really beautiful. Same with Venice, like fly into Italy from wherever you're flying into, the major airport, rent a car and start exploring the region, because there's so many so-called hidden gems that you'll come across that you probably have never heard of.
Another benefit of driving is also you can adjust your trip on the fly, basically, right? Like if you haven't planned it way ahead and booked everything ahead of time, most times you can spend a little bit more, more of your trip in a certain region. Say, you enjoyed it a lot more if you adjust the time you spend there. And another thing that I would also keep in mind is the fact that you'll likely be driving on toll routes. That's the quickest and most efficient way to get around. And you will find that there's those little toll booths before jumping on the highway. And keep in mind, most likely you won't have the telepass that's usually most locals have, right? So you'd have to grab a ticket. So keep in mind, take a look at those signs overhead, because if it has a telepass and it's wide open, I would recommend avoiding that entrance. Make sure you grab that ticket before you jump on the highway.
Yeah, that's a good point, because if you don't get a ticket, you might have issues getting off the highway, and you might actually have to pay a fine if you don't have one. But now that we talk about driving and we talked about exploring the regions, I think a lot of people, again, dream of going to Tuscany, right? So most people will probably be doing a road trip around Tuscany, which is great. I think Tuscany has a lot of different places that are still sort of undiscovered. But one of my favorite things is just driving through different areas of Italy, the different regions. So, there are definitely the most popular ones. And I already mentioned, like if you fly to Venice or if you go to Rome, Florence. Like those are the major places, I guess, where you could start your journey. But I think one of my favorite drives was when we were going to Sicily and we had to drive through Calabria. And I didn't expect it to be such a mountainous and such a gorgeous, gorgeous place, which was, again, very surprising. Not because it's mountainous, because I guess most of Italy is mountainous, but it was just a beautiful drive. I didn't expect it to be that beautiful. I don't know how you felt about it, but I just thought that was really magnificent.
Yeah, I enjoyed that drive because you also hit the coastline at certain points and you get to see some of the water and the sea over there.
What were some of your other favorite road trips, like some of the regions that we've driven?
I think driving up the eastern side of Italy, in the Abruzzo area along the way when we were that one time trying to find Rimini. And we came across, that hidden gem called Alba Adriatica, which is a really nice seaside resort area. So we ended up staying there several times after that because we liked it so much. We found a beautiful, small family-run hotel, which had fantastic food. And they were super nice. Great little spot and walking distance to the beach.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because we didn't know about that place, right? It was getting late. We've been driving all day and we kind of thought, oh, this looks kind of nice. Let's just pull over. We thought we were going to stay for a night, but then we ended up staying for almost a week, I think it was, because it was just such a great place. We never made it to Rimini and we were happy with that. And whenever we mentioned Alba Adriatica, I think there's only one person that I went to high school with, and she was, I think, from Rome originally. Her and her family used to go to Alba Adriatica, but that was the only person that I knew that has heard of it. Most people from Canada or whatever, they've never heard of it. So that was, to us, a hidden gem, even though it's a very touristy area, very popular area, but just not with, let's say, North American tourists.
I briefly touched on this subject earlier, but like I said, you want to try and seek local recommendations. So talk to the locals. Most times they'll be happy to mention one of their hidden gems or one of the places that are least traveled and are, enjoyed by the local Italians. So that's probably one of the things I would always recommend doing.
Yeah, and I think that goes beyond just the people in your hotel, right? Because people who work in hotels and B&Bs, they tend to have a bit more of a better understanding of, let's say, what you're looking for, right? So they could be great resource for you if you're staying somewhere, saying, what's a good place to go? Is there a nice beach? But I think it's also the people you come across, right? So people you meet when you're out and about, and they might give you also good recommendations and tell you about the local area, what you can go and see. I think when we're in Puglia, I remember they were telling us about several towns that we've never heard of that had really nice churches or had really architectural gems that we've never heard of, but we're like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. And then once you look it up, you're like, there is not that much information about it, at least not in English, because again, it's not that well known to North American tourists, right?
Yeah, agreed. Italians, they're more than happy to share their passion, right? They are proud people, and they're more than happy to provide some tips on where to go and recommendations from them, and I'd listen to them.
They are very proud, but also when you talk to them and they say, oh, where have you been? And you start naming all these places, not the most touristy places, they get really impressed when you say, oh, I've been here and I've been here, I've been there. And they're like, oh, wow, So I think that's also a good way of connecting with the locals because you can say, oh, I've been here, I've been there. And they get very happy when you explore their country and you see different places. And I think that's something that you will find that in every country, everywhere you go, the locals will be the ones who know where other locals go, right? They'll be able to tell you what's good to see. Like if you're looking for a beach, if you're looking for a restaurant, or if you're looking for a museum or like some sites that you might not even know. I think that's a great starting point. So make sure you drive and make sure you talk to the locals.
It's easy to feel rushed when you plan your trip to Italy. Most times you want to try and pack as much as possible, and we've done that ourselves initially on a couple of occasions, but it's a country that you need to embrace and savor. You need to spend some time in each location. Most times you won't be able to cram everything in a couple days, especially big places like Rome and Florence. But the smaller places need to be savored. You need to sit there, people watch and just enjoy the sights, right? Always take your time. That's one of the recommendations I can give you, is to always take your time, plan ahead, of course, but enjoy the moment, enjoy the scenery, enjoy just walking around and taking in the sights.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You don't want to be rushing from a place to place and you drive into town, you run around, then you go to the next one, because that's not really giving you a whole lot of experience and you're not going to enjoy it. You don't want to be stuck in the car like every single day for hours on end and just popping into a town or two and just looking at it. One of the best ways, I think, to deal with that is to find a central location. So you don't have to necessarily stay in a different place every night. I would say pick a location. Like when we were in Sicily, when we stayed in Avila, we ended up doing a whole bunch of day trips from Avila that were a bit more manageable, right? So you're not getting up in the morning, getting in a car, driving somewhere for an hour or two, then getting out, looking around, going to the next place. Because remember, in Italy, they close for maybe not half a day, but they close for a good chunk of the day. So if you're trying to drive from a place to place, you might find that you get to this museum or this archaeological park and it's closed, and then you have nothing to do because you have your plan to go somewhere else. So again, if you pick a central destination, and I'm not saying a big town, so let's say if you fly into Rome and drive to a different town and try to find other places around it. So if you drive from Rome to a smaller town, then you can do little day trips. Then after a few days, you can move on to the next town. And I think that's a better way of getting the most out of your trip, making sure that you're not exhausted, you're not spending too much time in the car, and you're not going to get to places when they're closed and there's nothing else there, right? I think that's not fun either.
Agreed. Yeah, you need to be strategic with your planning. Finding a central spot or a central area to kind of set up shop and figure things out. I think that's the best way to go about it.
So now let's talk about some of our hidden gems or places that we think are worth exploring. Now, mind you, we still haven't seen all of Italy. These are just recommendations, and some of them you might have heard of and maybe you haven't. But I think it's worth to say why we think they're hidden gems and what makes them so special. So the first one I think we should talk about is Matera. So Matera is in Basilicata, and you might be familiar with this town. It's famous for its cave dwellings. They're called Sassi. And if you've seen the latest James Bond movie, that's kind of where it kind of came on the map. So Matera is technically not that well visited. I say technically because when you get to Matera, there's tons of tourists. There were so many. But when you talk about Matera like outside Italy context, many people still don't know about it. They don't know where it is. They don't know what it's about. And it's, again, one of those places where it's not really that hidden, but in a way it is, right? It's a hidden gem if you're looking for something special and unique.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to, even though it could be super touristy or seem like super touristy when you get there, it's one of those places that local Italians love. You'll see a bunch of Italians there visiting, trekking along the side of the mountain there. So yeah, that's one of the places that's considered a hidden gem.
And I think it's one of those places that, unlike Rome, which has been popular for like centuries, right? Places like Matera weren't, because Matera was the one they were calling it the shame of Italy, because the people who lived there, again, they're sort of dwellings in the cave, built into the caves. And for the longest time, they were very poor, the people who lived there. So I don't know if they had no electricity. There were issues around there. And eventually they had to move these people out of some of the worst dwellings, because, again, there were no running water. There was no, hygienically, it was probably not the best. And again, people in Italy were not necessarily the most proud of that, but it just shows you how much a place can change, how much a perception of a place can change if you just spin it differently, right? Now people go and they pay a ton of money to stay in one of those cave dwellings, as an Airbnb or a hotel. And they're fabulous because they're not something that people are used to. But, this was a thing for them. This was for the locals. That's how they lived. So again, is it a hidden gem? It depends how you look at it. I think for somebody who's coming to Italy and wants to see something a bit different, I would say go to Matera because I found Matera to be like, it's an exceptionally magical place. I don't think there's too many places like Matera in Italy. And again, if you're looking for something unique, Matera is it for me.
Now, if you've listened to one of our previous podcasts, we touched on quite a bit on Benevento and Campania. This city is actually in the hills of Campania region, and it's considered one of the hidden gems, in my opinion. It dates back to the Roman times, ancient Samites, and it was considered the city of witches from back in the day. They had a contingent of witches that lived in the area, and they carried out their rituals. And it's a very popular city in the region. And the one of the places that you can see amazing sites of Roman architecture, because there's the Arch of Trajan, there's the ancient theater that you can visit, which is nearly fully intact. It's just a fantastic thing to see. And of course, you can always take a stroll through the historic city center, which is beautifully restored. It's just a fantastic architecture throughout, and you get to try all the local cuisines. And even try the local liqueur, which is the Strega liqueur, and well known outside of Italy.
Yeah, Benevento was one of those places where, you think about it, it's like it's not a small town, but it's also not a huge town. And it's about, half an hour from where we live. And I love it. I think it's a fantastic city. Like you said, they have so much Roman architecture. Like that amphitheater there is just fantastic. It's so well preserved. You can actually walk around it. There are no crowds. You don't have to wait in line like you have to wait at the Colosseum. And it's such a pretty town. There's just so much, again, architecture, but there's also shops, restaurants. It's got a great vibe. It's one of those cities that you probably have never heard of. And if you are in Campania, I think it's a great place to visit. You don't have to like Roman ruins. They have a lot of other things. They have different museums. They have, as you said, the Strega liqueur. So Strega, in case you didn't know, means witch. So they do have Museum of Witches, which is also kind of funky. And again, it's a place that I don't think many people have gone to. And I don't even know if you're from outside Italy, like even from North America in particular, I don't think you would have even heard of that town because I don't think there were too many visitors that go there.
Yeah, now let's go down further south in Sicily. There's a place called Bressamemi in Sicily. It's actually on the southeastern coast of the island, and it's a really charming fishing village with a plethora of rich history, beautiful scenery, and picturesque harbors. It's a place to go if you want to try the amazing seafood that's well known in that area, and some amazing trattorias. And you can obviously just sit back and enjoy, people watching with your favorite beverage at one of the bars. And on the weekends, you'll see that the village gets super busy. It's filled with people that visit for the weekends just to hit the restaurants there, and they're fantastic. The food there is top notch, especially if you like seafood, like I said. But there are some interesting shops also. A lot of seafood based canned foods, jarred. So you actually find one of the popular dishes in the area, which is the sarde in a can, which is essentially the sardines with all the ingredients you need to make that sarde con pasta, which is the sardine pasta. So you'll find that available to you there.
Yeah, and Bressamemi is one of those places that we discovered because a friend of us told us, right? We've never heard of it. And because we were in Sicily for 2 weeks, a friend of us was like, oh, you should go see Bressamemi. And we're like, where? And we looked it up and we thought, okay, let's go for like a day trip. And it was such a beautiful little town that most people probably have never heard of. Another place that I think it's worth mentioning, and I almost feel like we should do a separate episode about it, but I think a lot of people should know about Genoa. So Genoa, or Genova, I guess sometimes you can say. I know which one is the Italian way, which was the English way, because I keep saying it both ways. But Genoa is a big city, right? Genoa used to be a very powerful republic, and it's just near Cinque Terre. So it's probably one of the places you can make your base. And Genoa is surprisingly not as visited by tourists as other towns. So I always thought that was kind of strange. So when we went, I thought it was such a fabulous city.
Yeah, I found the city was actually really cool to visit. Outside of the popular destination of Cinque Terre, the city itself is actually fantastic. It's very, I guess, comparable to places like Milan, where you can visit shops, do some shopping there, purchase clothes and such. But yeah, it's one of those interesting off the beaten path places that aren't really discussed very often.
And it's interesting because Genoa is a big city, right? It's not like a tiny town. It's a big city that not many people go to. And I still can't figure out why, because it's such a great place to go. So, like you said, there's shops, restaurants. Yeah, but there's also really great architecture. There's so many palazzos. There's museums. Because like I said, this used to be like a powerful republic, right? So you had a lot of money there. People with money built beautiful palazzos. And it's one of those places where sometimes when you see a beautiful building, it almost looks like a window, but it isn't. So they used to have like painted windows, and they would have like faux windows, which you really see a lot of it in Genoa, because back in those days, you had to pay tax on how many windows you had. So they would solve that problem by painting windows on, so it makes it look like it's even, but you actually didn't have to pay taxes on it. So again, Genoa has a great maritime history. Fun fact, Christopher Columbus was actually supposedly born in Genoa. So if you're into those fun facts, that's also a thing to consider. It's also a great place for great views, because it's on like a hill and you can do some climbing, and there's spectacular views of the city.
Let's discuss some of the places closer to home, our area here. Some of the archaeological sites actually are plentiful in this region. I guess we could start probably with Paestum. We visited Paestum on several occasions. It's located in the Campania region, of course, and it's home to Italy's basically most intact and best preserved ancient Greek temple. So it's definitely a place you would want to visit. And when you go there, it's usually local Italians that are visiting. It's fairly busy during the summer, so if possible, you might want to visit off season. But I think it's one of the places that you have to see.
I think Paestum was one of my favorite sites. We've been there many times, and the site is huge. When you think of Pompeii, you think, yeah, everybody goes to Pompeii. And Paestum was a Greek colony. Then it was built up by the Romans. But it really is a gem because, again, I would say not as many people go to Paestum as they do to Pompeii. Everybody who comes to Campania goes to Pompeii. And Paestum is just a fabulous place. It's one of my favorite sites. And if you go there towards the afternoon when the sun starts to set, it's got really beautiful sunsets. So I would agree with you. I think Paestum is just a fantastic place. But speaking of ancient ruins, another place that I think people can go to instead of going to Pompeii is Herculaneum.
Yeah, Herculaneum, I think, is actually a better spot than Pompeii, honestly. It's much more intact, and you can actually see some cool things there. There's the palace skeletons that are sitting in some of the caves where they would actually park their boats back in the day before Vesuvius decimated Pompeii and the adjacent area. I think that's one of the places that I would recommend over Pompeii.
And it's also more intimate, right? It's a smaller site, whereas Pompeii is a massive site, and then you have the modern Pompeii sort of around it. With Herculaneum, the new Herculaneum is built on top of the old Herculaneum. If you're inside the archaeological site, you see people where they live. So they have balconies overlooking the ruins. They can just look down into the site, which is kind of freaky when you think about it. But anyway, you can walk into actual spaces in between the different remnants of villas. You can actually see the villa, what it looked like. You can actually walk around. You can see some of the mosaics, whereas in Pompeii, I think the more we go, the less I tend to see, because I think it's all blocked off now. So you can't really just venture into between where the people's homes were, whereas before you could. So yeah, I would say Herculaneum is definitely a good place to go if you're looking for, for that ancient Roman experience, but you don't want to spend time or battle the crowds at Pompeii, because Pompeii is very busy.
Speaking of ancient Rome, I think one of the places that are often overshadowed by or visitors going to Rome is Ostia. Ostia Antica is actually once the bustling port city of ancient Rome. So you'll find, intact and very well preserved Roman streets. You'll see the temples, bathhouses, etc. It's a huge site in that area. And then, of course, Ostia Antigua, it's a very well built beachside resort area too. So you can actually just go for a walk around down the boardwalk further down, closer to the water, and and there's tons of restaurants, lots of places to visit.
Yeah, I think that was also one of the places that it was on our radar, and we actually stayed in that area. I think Ostia Antica is one of those places where I think even less people go to than they do to Herculaneum, because Herculaneum is close to Pompeii, but Ostia is not really far from Rome, maybe a half an hour. I could take the train from there. We've been a couple of times, and the site wasn't busy. Again, it's a massive site, and you have very well preserved town. Because with Ostia, unlike Herculaneum and Pompeii, it wasn't destroyed due to a volcano explosion. So you don't have that damage. It was just sort of abandoned over time, and it was covered up with floods and different mud and whatever. So it's still well preserved, but not as many people go there, which again is a miss because it's such a great site. There's so many sites. We can talk about these forever. If you go to Italy, you have to see the ruins. But the good thing is there's so many that some of them are just right there in the open. So you can just look for them. Like if you go on Google Maps where you are in the area, I'm pretty sure you'll find some that you probably have never heard of and that are not on the map. So again, if you take the road trip and you stay in smaller places, you'll definitely find them.
Another alternative, I think, to a place like Lake Como is actually Lake Garda. I found that actually a beautiful spot to actually visit in comparison to Lake Como. Lake Como obviously is gorgeous, but it's so busy there that it's hard to enjoy your stay. So I found Lake Garda was actually really enjoyable. What do you think?
I loved Lake Garda. Again, it wasn't totally devoid of tourists, but I found it was interesting because there were a lot of Germans there, right? So Austrian, German, whatever, to the point where they were talking to us in German, like the locals. So when you think about, is this a hidden gem? Well, obviously not to the Germans or the Italians, but to somebody coming from North America who only hears about like Lake Como, I think Lake Garda is a good thing that you could consider as a hidden gem because it's just so beautiful. And you have all these little towns around them that you can take a boat, you can, drive around and visit the different towns. And it's beautiful. There's so much to do for like outdoor activities. And there's the cultural component of the towns being very old and obviously picturesque. And we also discovered that they have a lot of they have a lot of lemon trees, which again was surprising because you don't think in that type of climate, but there you go, right?
Yeah, there's so many places that are considered hidden gems in Italy, and we just can't cover all of them.
Make sure you check out the show notes for this episode for some suggestions, and again, for tips on how to go about finding those hidden gems. But we'll also cover different areas in upcoming episodes to give you an idea of not just the popular touristy places to visit, but also the towns that we love and the places we've been to. So stay tuned. And this brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review on whatever you're listening right now. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.